separating out aid in dying from being suicide. Another quote from Barbara Coombsley from this period of compassionate choices is that comparing people who are terminally ill and pursuing assisted death by saying that they are committing suicide or pursuing suicide is akin to saying that people who were in the World Trade Centers when they were burning, those people jumping out of the World Trade Centers, that's not suicide. We can't call that suicide. It's an affront to their integrity and dignity to say that they were committing suicide because they did not want to die. They were choosing the lesser of two horrific options, and that she's comparing that to people who are dying with terminal illness, that they do not want to die, they would not choose this. They are choosing the lesser of two horrific options, just in the same situation. That was a very powerful quote from her. Okay, so as far as legal and policy factors go, Compassionate Choices has continued the good fight for passing legislation in other states outside of just Oregon for Death with Dignity acts. When this research ended, or the caps for this research ended, it was Vermont, Washington, and Montana also had acts. Present day, there are many more states other than just that. And then they also, because they are working to push for legislation in other states that legalizes death with dignity, they make a point of saying that euthanasia outside of the medical system and the law is detrimental to the fabric of society. This is another Barbara Coombsley quote, she's full of them. And this is saying that it's disrespectful to the medical system, it's disrespectful to the grieving processes of families to have covert grieving processes. It takes away the credibility of the medical system to try to pursue this within the medical system where it's not legal, that we have to push for legalization so that people can do this out in the open and have transparency and honesty during their dying processes. Yeah, and then they also commented on the Palliative Care Information Act when it was passed in New York, and they do believe that this was a positive thing and that it should be implemented in more states, and they did get their lobbyists working on that as well. As far as medical As far as medical technologies and protocols go with this organization, they are special and different from Compassionate Choices in that they really advocated for maximum usage of pain medication and opioids for patients who were suffering and who were ill. So of course they're still pushing that this is happening in hospice, this is happening in palliative care, and they also say that physician-assisted dying in this era cannot happen without hospice and palliative care, that it's not detracting from those treatments, but rather it is used with those treatments because if you're pursuing assisted dying, it's because you have used every other option available to you, and this is the only option for relief and as a last resort, and nothing else has worked. But back to the adequate pain control, there was an interesting noble but misguided belief in the medical system at this point that we were putting terminally ill patients at risk of addiction by giving them the maximum dosage of pain medication, and this shouldn't be a problem or a concern because addiction affects the lives of people who have a life to look forward to after their illness or their ailment or their injury, whereas these people did not have a life after their illness to be affected by addiction. And so Compassionate Choices did push pretty strongly and make a rather loud argument that people with terminal illness should be medicated fully, they should be given the option to have as much medication as they want or need, and that there should be an honest communication point with those patients that using more pain medication may hasten death, and is the patient aware of that? Are they okay with that? Do they consent to that? And if so, let's make sure that we can relieve your symptoms to the maximum potential. And they also note here that people with addiction are seeking out the drug and the sensation of the drug, whereas people with terminal illness are in situations of horrible suffering and they're seeking out the relief that comes with that medication, and that those two things need to be separated, and that people need to be given full pain control because that also helps them want to live longer, or helps them not want to pursue physician-aided dying, and it also gives them more quality of life at the very last little iota of life. Yeah, and again, physician-aided dying is a relief of last resort. So this brings us to our conclusions. So we are working around death with dignity here and how to conceptualize it. We're going to go through and talk about what we pulled out of all of this literature and what this means for future work and implementation of death with dignity practices. So there's going to be two different areas that we talk about separately here: the medical system definitions of death with dignity and the legal system conceptualizations for how to achieve dignity. First, we're going to talk about medicine. So one of the other big factors we talk about here is technologies and protocols in medicine. And so important to note that comfort is more important than curative care in terminal illness after the point where they're past being able to be cured, and that patients should know all of their options going into care, going into their treatment, and their doctor should be the one to communicate those. And then also, side note, all of these teal ringed boxes in the diagram from here on out are the dignity conceptualizations that we've pulled away from this study. Okay, the other one that comes from comfort being more important than curative in terminal illness is that pain control and symptom relief should be prioritized, meaning we should use as much pain medication as necessary, and we should also be treating all of the other symptoms of suffering, such as some key ones that people don't think about, like sores, dehydration, itching, dementia. These things should all be treated adequately, or at least given attention to in order to provide comfort for a patient, separate from pain. Okay. Another situation in the medical system is that the doctor should always be the ally of the patient and should communicate honestly with the patient and also be something of a teammate or a partner throughout the terminal illness process and not abandon that patient. And then under the technologies and protocols in the medical system, it's also important to note that we must respect patient wishes and facilitate them. So giving them information is one thing, helping them achieve those treatment options is a separate thing that should also be respected. Within the legal system, death with dignity acts have been important for facilitating dignity. So the Oregon Death with Dignity Act has been around for about 21 years, and there's extensive compliance forms and documentation for how it has been used in those 21 years. And from those forms, we can tell that it does improve control and choice for terminally ill patients, does help them to have autonomy and facilitate their own needs and assert themselves over their dying process rather than be ruled by it. It also really helps improve grief for the patient who is grieving the end of their life and for the family who is dealing with that patient's death. For in the cases of people who are pursuing hastened death as an option in terminal illness, legalizing it is better because people can openly deal with their grief and can have their community support around them, whereas in cases where it's pursued illegally, that grief is often covert and not handled to its maximum need or fruition. So, okay, now so with the Death with Dignity Act's point of this, future legislative goals should be that the U.S. legalizes death with dignity on a more universal platform, so that this isn't something that involves medical tourism or people moving to other states in order to pursue a hastened death when they're suffering in intolerable ways. Also in the legal system, we have to think about the doctor's roles in facilitating these treatments for patients, and the Palliative Care Information Act of 2011 again has taught us that hospice and palliative care should always be communicated as good treatment options and that they should always be utilized when possible. So all of these teal boxes again are the conceptualizations of death with dignity pulled away from this study. And this brings us again to this fun and vague concept of what is dignity. And so